Hi, Abdullah. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too. Thank you so much for being on my podcast, for taking out the time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And so, first things first, let's get started. How have the past few months been for you on a personal level and a professional level? Like, how has it played out for you?
On a personal level, I just think it's sort of been an interesting phenomenon. People talk a lot about like the political and economic impact of COVID. I'm really interested in hearing like just what it does socially because like it's sort of unprecedented for so many people to be like trapped with their own thoughts in their own rooms for that many months on end. And that's exactly what's happened. It's just like it's given me a lot of time and space to be introspective, and that can be a good thing at times, that can be a bad thing at times. um, and that sort of fed into how it's been professionally for me as well, because that also means I get a lot more writing done, so I've been, thankfully staying productive and making a lot of material. So mixed bag.
So that just reminds me of how, like, I don't know if you felt this, but I felt like in the months prior to this whole crazy outbreak and quarantine, I just felt like the world was just being pushed to a certain extreme. Like, life was so fast paced. I don't know, maybe I felt that it was extremely fast paced because I had just graduated and I actually saw real life, like as a grown up human being. So I just felt like this point, the tipping point was coming. And I think that as terrible as it has been in a lot of ways, it was necessary for all of us to be put face to face with our own selves and the lives
Yeah.
that we've made for ourselves, because I think people don't want to look at themselves till they're forced to, because it brings a lot of discomfort. So I'm glad that, it's pushed you to do more writing and be more intimate with your craft, as you've said. So I'm really I'm really intrigued by your process. Like, I listen to your music and I listen to the lyrics and I'm like, ye kis tarah, how? Because I imagine you just sitting there and writing it out. And I just want to know, like, how, what field you have to get into. How do you do it? How do you write those lyrics?
Um, well, it's sort of been a painstaking process over the years, but I've one of the things to come out of quarantine, honestly, is just that I've been able to hone in on what that process is and make it a bit more structured. Um, and it used to be just chaos. Like I would just write anything that came to mind and just try to make some sense of it. But now what I usually do is when I experience something that I feel like is worth extrapolating something from, that I feel like is a good thing to write a song about, I just sort of sit in whatever feeling that it is, and I sit in whatever moment that it is, and I just write everything that I'm thinking down just in prose, like not trying to make it rhyme or anything, just dump everything that I'm thinking out on like pen to paper. And then after that like sort of take lines from it. I take lines that have similar themes and I group them together. I take lines that have like similar words, I group them together, and just sort of, and then sort of clump them into verses, and then try to come up, and then usually what happens next is I'll go through my very massive library of beats and demos that I've made over the years, and just sort of find something that matches the mood of what I'm thinking, and then I'll just start like humming a melody over it, just trying to figure something out, and then I'll just like put words into it, and then slowly it'll just sort of turn into a whole top line. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Like, it's like a tapestry, It's there's so many elements and you have to weave it all together. And I mean, you're doing a phenomenal job. I hope you know that.
Thank you.
And um, so I want to know, okay, for instance, Come Through with Manu, kids with Shamoon, how do you bring the other artist into your kind of mood? Like, I feel like both the artists in each song are so in sync, like they're in one kind of energy, and that's not easy to, balance, because everybody brings their own distinct thing into any kind of art form. Or isme both artists have their own distinct presence, but they work so well together as well. So, like, how how do you manage to do that, create that balance?
Um, so collaborations have been an interesting thing for me recently because I've never been collaborative. Not that I don't have like collaborative nature, but I just always been making music in a vacuum. Like particularly before I started releasing it, it was just me and in a room. That was it. Um, Once I started getting a bit more exposed, I had the option to work with more people. And my first album had like one collaboration, like the whole thing was mostly just me. Um, and when I started feeling the need to get other people on board was when I started writing some more intensely personal material.
Okay.
And I think it actually applies a little less to the tracks that you mentioned, but more particular to some other tracks that I've done, where it was like I write something super heavy, and it's almost like I need like a break, like I need somebody else to
Okay,
chime in,
balance it out.
yeah, share the emotional burden,
Okay.
you know, and sometimes like just offer their own perspective,
Hmm.
which in a way makes my own struggle sort of take on a new light for me,
Hmm.
you know. So it's been interesting just letting people into, because it's not just like, not to sound super pretentious about it, but it's not just like letting somebody in
Hmm.
to a song, it's about letting somebody into an experience,
Yeah.
because when I write a song about something, it's very inextricably like tied to what it's about for me. And so when you let a stranger into that,
Hmm.
it's very vulnerable, and it's very like it's an eye-opening thing to
Yeah.
experience, honestly. But as for like stylistically trying to keep things consistent, I usually like end up I work very mechanically, like I work very methodically. So I what I end up doing is um I think of the sort of the tropes of my style, and I think of the tropes of their style, and I just really very like um scientifically almost try to construct a middle ground, you know.
Oh.
um so like, yeah, so like, I mean, in terms of the textures that I'm using, in terms of the chord progressions that I'm using, in terms of the tempo that it's in terms of the structure of the beat, in terms of all these things, in terms of subject matter, like it's always like I have to be very precise about how much of it is me and how much of it is the artist I'm working with,
Yeah.
and that usually ends up taking on like it ends up sounding like something that's just completely different, and then other times what I actually enjoy doing is like when I work with like some more mainstream artists, particularly people who are just like more mainstream than I am. What I do is so like for years I've just made super experimental stuff, like on my own time. I've made like a lot of things that were just like me exploring the format and exploring the medium and just trying new things. But I always thought that, oh, there's no like market for this, there's no space for this in our industry. um and I would think back to like, why isn't that? Now I would always get to the same conclusion of like, oh, it's because the mainstream artists don't do it. Like if unless they do it,
And yeah.
yeah, unless they do it, there's not going to be like a market for it. So now that I have access to some mainstream artists, I'm like, why not give them that opportunity myself?
Why
Like,
not?
why not do something?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not like do something experimental, and just sort of curate what I can do with their voice.
I think it's great that you thought that way because I feel like, especially over here, more artists need to collaborate with each other. You know, it's not, it makes it bigger and better, and it can only add to the art that's out there. So I'm really glad that you don't see the mainstream as something that you are not distinctly not a part of. Like, you know, there are nuances and you can be a
Yeah.
part of it and contribute to it in many ways. But I really wanted to talk about what you mentioned earlier about being vulnerable as an artist. So that's definitely a process in and of itself because I think at different points, the degree of how vulnerable you are differ. And it's also, it has a lot to do with your relationship with yourself and how you view certain experiences in your life, whether you are processing them, whether you have, you know, processed them or not.
Right.
So, and when you put your art out there, it doesn't completely belong to you anymore either. Like for instance, अभी जो Churels निकला है उसमें आसिम अब्बासी said that, you know, Churels is no longer just his and it's no longer just for the team, it belongs to everyone. And for an artist, that can be a beautiful and a daunting process. So how have you dealt with people's I wouldn't want to say comments. I'd like to say feedback or the discourse that may have developed around
Yeah.
your work. Like, have you felt like you've been able to convey the emotion that you set out to, or what's your relationship been with the audience, so to speak?
um so it's really like something, it's sort of like a tap. Like I in
Like
terms of like
it was like a first I was like tap or tap.
in terms of like in terms of the work itself,
Yeah.
right? I have a level of control
Hmm.
over how much I want to let people in,
Yeah.
you know. um like I'm now working on an album where like I have very explicitly been forcing myself to include personal details in the lyrics, you know, whether that be like using the names of objects or places or people, or, you know, really explicitly describing in vivid terms experiences that I've lived. Um, and that's very counterintuitive to me. That's something that I have to force myself to do because if you might see like in the material that I have already, like particularly more so in like a lot of my earlier material, it's like a very a very obtuse vocabulary. Like it's vague words, and it's like
Like
it's a lot of it's
for instance, the kerosene in my telescope part, like that
yeah,
says so much. But I'm also
yeah,
like, what is he feeling? Like, what
yeah,
exactly makes it
yeah,
a telescope heart? You know, and
yeah,
you don't find out. So
yeah.
I get
It's really like that I liked that for a while. I
yeah,
really liked the idea of keeping it just fully open interpretation, and anyone can, it's sort of like yeah, you maximize how many people can enjoy it because people can draw whatever they want from it,
yeah,
you know. But also that's also kind of a defense mechanism because it's an easy way to not have to be
yeah.
personal, you know. And so now I'm just sort of trying to get myself out of that comfort zone.
That's a huge step. Like that, and it
Yeah,
takes, like you said, you have to make a concerted effort to be like, okay, no, you must, you know, divulge some
yeah,
kind of specific information. And I think that with stand-up comedy, I have the same barrier. Like
right,
I want to be, I want to let them in, but I'm just like, no, like I don't want to tell them completely specific details about my life because then it's not just mine and they know things and then they want to, you know. So I totally understand that, and it's definitely something that you have to come to terms with as well in terms of sharing your life. Like you have to end up
yeah,
sharing a lot of it, and then I don't know the lines get a bit blurry, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
the tap is it's off, but it's dripping, you know? So you're just like, what do I do with this
yeah,
drippy tap? So
yeah,
another thing that I wanted to kind of get into was how you feel being a musician in this part of the world, given that your music isn't exactly the way that, you know, mainstream music is over here, but it's also it's so relatable and it's so real and it feels like ours, but the sound is also in so many ways just this beautiful amalgamation of so many different experiences. So as an artist, how do you feel when you are, you know, situated here at the end?
yeah. Um, it's a constant like balancing act, honestly, because it's like I mean, I grew up listening to Western music.
Yeah,
I didn't listen to much local material, honestly. Um, and like everything is then just mimicry for me, you know? Like I've picked up the language of pop music over the years from just Western artists. I picked up the sort of the tropes of what the sound is like and what the structure is like from all of those artists. And it's not as relevant to our like indigenous music, but it's like um what that's done is like, particularly in recent years, I've begun to like grow a real like appreciation and um just a need to understand local music more. um and it's sort of like it's and I it's there's this constant fear of like what separates you from just another run of the mill, you know, pop artist in the West, you know. What does this whole identity bring to the table for your music?
yeah,
And that's something that I've always just sort of tried to shut out for a long time, because it's like, you know, if it's not intrinsic to my process, then why try to force myself?
yeah.
um but with this current album that I'm about to release, that did change, because it came at a time when I started working on it when I moved to the US, and
Okay.
I moved there for school. And there's this sort of phenomenon that I feel like is pretty well documented, is that when Pakistani people go like somewhere in the West,
Yeah.
they usually end up sort of clinging to their own roots
Yeah.
more closely than they would otherwise. Yeah. And so that's sort of what happened. I went there and I felt like I needed to be more in touch with my Pakistaniness in order to sort of keep myself sane.
Yeah.
And the way that that manifested was like a lot of reading, you know, of like, you know, literature in Urdu, which I'd never really done before, you know,
Please tell me.
a lot of manto, just a lot of manto, and singing in Urdu. Like it was around the time that I just started being in touch with Misha Shafi, and I just wanted. I was listening to one of her song from, you know, Pepsi Meh a lot, and I was just like, oh, like I sat down with the lyrics and I really like went through them like line by line, trying to figure out what it means, going through like Google Translate, like trying to figure out what everything was. And even Google Translate didn't have the answer to some of those words.
Some of
And
it
then
does
and then
translate.
yeah, and I was just like, there were lines that I still didn't get, and I just asked her, and I was like, okay, I've been trying to figure this out. Like, what does this mean? She just sends me like a whole like fully translated version. I'm like, I didn't have to go through all this work, but anyway. Um, but it was just like it was a song that I really like related to, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna record this. You know, like I'd never sung in Urdu before.
Yeah.
I'd never tried. Like I don't feel like I have a voice for it, but I went ahead and I did it, and I recorded the whole song, and it was just like more about like just breaking a psychological barrier for myself, you
Definitely.
know. And then, you know, like the next time I did that was on the song with Manu, Come Through, where
Yeah.
like the chorus is sort of
Yeah.
bilingual, and that was daunting to me, but it was like, you know, why is that daunting to me, you know? And so I just got stuck up on the why, and I decided to do it anyway. and then like that sort of Pakistaniness factor like sort of started seeping its way into other tracks as well. Like the song with Zoe is like very, very like there's a lot of there's a Qawwali sample happening, and so like it did organically just come into my process in a way that I never thought it would.
And I think that's the best way, because then it just flows in and you don't have to decide where to cut and paste and, put it.
Yeah.
But it's great to see your evolution as well as an artist. Like with every new song, it's like there is some part where you can just see the growth and the evolution. And I think that as just a fan, it's beautiful to witness. So I can't even imagine how it feels for you. So coming to another thing, like you talked about, barriers that we have within ourselves and how you dealt with this one in terms of language and lyrics. So how do you deal with the creative block that sometimes comes with, the process? I've read a lot about writer's block and creative block, and apparently it doesn't even exist or something. Like I was just like, yeah,
Come on.
who are you to say this? And then I was like, oh my god, this. So like, it just, I don't know. I was so confused, but it
I
kind of,
fully reject that.
yeah, like, yeah, it doesn't exist. Okay. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, easy for you to say.
I've become very skeptical of anything on the internet, especially after COVID and all the news that was being reported. Because साथ में like news पढ़ रही होती हूँ, like Al Jazeera and everything, and then साथ में बस David Icke बोल रहा होता है कि सब सब गलत है, मुझे पता है. So honestly, creative block does exist.
It does.
How do you navigate it?
So one of the privileges that I've had is that I work in multiple media. So it's like I'm not just singing it, I'm also writing it, and I'm also producing it, So sometimes what happens is if I'm suffering a block in one avenue, I'll just try the other, and a lot of times that's worked for me because like, if I can't, if I feel like I have something to say and it's like a sneeze, like it's just not happening and I can't write it, I don't have the words for it. I'll just sort of go into my computer and I'll just start like messing with sound, and I'll start creating textures until I find something that just sort of resonates with what I'm feeling, even if it's just like a non-verbal representation of what I'm feeling, like even if I can't write it, but when all of that fails, I find that it usually just comes down to like not having anything to write about. Like I've put out one album, I have another one on the way. But the first album,
when is it coming?
What?
Sorry to cut you. Okay.
No, I can't say. I don't know, honestly. That's the thing. Yeah. Yeah, because we wanted to wait till after Muharram, but like we might still, I'm not entirely sure. It depends on sort of the next single. Like we have a video coming out for it, so we have just sort of some that's being edited right now, and so once that's done, then we'll start thinking about that. But yeah, what was I saying? Yeah, so the album that I made before the first one that I released was an album that was like, it was 13 tracks, and it was sort of like really just like a labor of love, and it took 2.5 years, and it was really sort of out there, and I never released any of it because it was like just sort of a bit too weird to put out. But that entire album was literally an album about not having anything to write about, like, because I wrote it when I was 16. Like since then I've had a lot more material to work with, just I've lived more, but at the time it was just like such a sheltered life that I really didn't have anything to write about. Like I had nothing to write about, and I decided to turn that on its head and just really sort of stretch the concept of not having anything to say into 13 songs. And so yeah, and I named the album Anhedonia, which is it's a symptom of depression, which basically it's a symptom that means the inability to feel pleasure. So it was just like droning nothingness. Just like that's all I wrote about, you know. So it's just you end up finding like desperate things, like, and I feel like the only real cure to a creative block is just to experience something, you know.
Yeah, I think
um
that is really well put, and it's so like in a nutshell, and it makes so much sense that if you are feeling a creative block, just go out and experience something, you know.
yeah.
It, yeah, that's very useful actually. And it makes so much sense because experiences are the fodder and they're the resource from which we,
Yeah.
you know, derive meaning and association and things like that. So I think that's very well put. Very articulate. You're very articulate. I really like that. There's so much. There's so many layers, and that's why I'm so glad that I also started doing this podcast, because it's just nice to talk to artists and just, you know, get to know what's behind the art, because it there is always so much more that is so intriguing. And when you connect with someone's work, you naturally do want to have a conversation and learn more. So,
Yeah.
I mean, clearly music is your refuge as well, but are there any other kind of activities, or I don't know, like hobbies or things that just bring you peace and just put you in a better frame of mind? Something that keeps you going, something you rely on in your own way.
um hmm. So it's interesting, like music is so vast for me,
Yeah,
like that it's sort of become all of those things for me. Like it's like it's work, and it's also like
yeah,
the way that I seek refuge from work, um because I feel like I've the one skill that I feel like I really have in my music is that I've um adopted the ability to like um be sort of chameleonic about the style that I work in,
yeah,
even though that doesn't really show as much in the work that I release, because I release stuff with like a market in mind.
yeah.
When I'm making stuff privately, I'll just like one day I'll decide to like be a, you know, like a just like a disco diva from the 70s, and then the next day I'll decide to be like a weird, you know, experimental performance artist and make like a 15-minute, you know, ambient track. You know, it's just like every day I can
You wear
completely change my
different,
mind about.
different hats.
Yeah, and that's just the way that I get to keep it new for myself, and I keep it, you know, fun for myself. But there are this things that I really enjoy doing. I'm really getting into like screenwriting. I've always like really loved filmmaking. um yeah, and I've been studying film for like a few years now. And you know, just working on like a lot of short film treatments that end up sort of just staying in my Google Doc for
Oh,
forever. um
bring them to the screen. But I'm just curious, like, what have you studied? What have you been studying? What are your qualifications? Because
what's my CV?
yeah, because you know, sometimes things are so distinctly different from what the person ends up doing. Like, I studied poli sci, like,
Right.
so I'm just curious to know. Okay.
So I'm a freshman. So my well, I'm a sophomore now actually, yeah, because school starts in a few weeks. Um, but yeah, I'm going to liberal arts school, so it's like I the system is that I don't really have to decide what I'm majoring in until the end of this year. So
Yeah.
I have a few months to decide, but what that means is I get to just take courses in anything that I want, and I'm leaning towards like CS or psychology, you know, somewhere in that zone.
Okay.
Yeah,
Psychology is definitely something that I would have done if LUMS offered it as a major, but
yeah,
I think psychology, a deeper understanding, would definitely add so much more to the music. Like I can hear it. I can hear.
yeah, yeah.
So
And,
that's
and it has, honestly, it does, because I took it for 2 years for my A levels, right? And then and what's interesting is like I also for during my A levels I took psychology, and then I took a media course, like film, which
okay.
basically was just film,
Okay.
and then I took three sciences, which like was a weird combination, honestly, because like I'm not really a science person,
Okay.
but then like sort of putting myself in that situation and like being forced to survive A level science. uh
It is the right word.
yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
But the way that it sort of it ended up showing up in my music, like
Yeah.
psychology particularly, but also the sciences ended up, because this was in that phase of like not having anything to write about.
Yeah.
So I ended up just like writing about, you know, quantum physics, and I ended up writing about like biology, and I ended up writing about evolution, and I ended up writing about like, you know, different psychological theories, and like
Yeah.
that just ended up, you take what you can get, you know. That's my point. Like when you have nothing to write about, you take what you can get.
I remember Zain was telling me about you initially when I think you were recording something. So True Brew. And he's like, ये बच्चा crazy है, इसके lyrics सुनो, ये क्या है, ये किस तरह से? And I was just like, oh my god, that's when I started listening to your music because of him, because he's like, this kid is insane, he's amazing. So when I was like listening to the lyrics, I was like, oh my god, where is this coming from, you know? So now I know where it was coming from, parts of it. And
Yeah, yeah.
it's really like artists are just walking, talking, these kind, like you said, like a chameleon, like you take on different kinds of things and you internalize different things, and it's quite interesting. But how come you didn't study music or music production or something like
Well, you know, it comes down to this industry.
that? Yeah,
Like it's so mercurial, and it's so like it's so not steady, and like I say industry, but there's no industry. It's all just sort of
that's fine.
no, but it's true. Like it's really just, it's just, you know, there's no infrastructure.
Yeah,
And so what that means is there's no guarantees.
yeah,
So like, so for me that means like the whole point of getting a degree for me, like if I'm going to do it, is just to get something that's like a safety net, you
yeah,
know, so that if this doesn't work out, and like, you know, like with the thing about music is like you can make a name for yourself, you can be famous, but that doesn't mean there's a paycheck. Like it's like there's no um steady source of income in the music industry.
yeah,
So it's just like, I mean, I hope that by the time that I am sort of out of college, things have gotten better, because I honestly have seen so much improvement just in the 4 or 5 years that I've been here. Like just in the time that I've been in the industry, like that's when like all of our, like we only have like a handful of streaming services, all of those popped up while just after I started, you know, like, you know, like all of those, you know, like radio stations and like their sort of promotional campaigns and that sort of stuff opened up. And then like, you know, a lot of the music shows, there's only like one when I was there, you know, when I started, and like now there's so many more. So it's, I see things getting better, and I really hope that it's like good enough by
yeah.
the time that I'm sort of diving into this head first. But in case it doesn't, you know,
But
get
then
a degree in CS.
you have such a great point. I mean, you're just almost a sophomore in college, and you've done all of this work. So I think that you got a good head start, like great. And I think hopefully we won't disappoint you here, and hopefully things will be promising when you, graduate and things. And I just feel like I think the journey of an artist is tough anyway, but then in this part of
Yeah.
the world, it's just like an added kind of a layer that sometimes it does kind of, discourage you or just make you feel like, why is this happening? But I think it's important to just use that as fuel for your drive and just, kind of make things work like
Yeah.
that. But I think that it is important to have other things in order to just, be more realistic. Though I hate this realistic, but like that's why I studied political science, because I was like, I never know what's gonna happen. So, I
Yeah.
must do that. And I just wish the world order was in favor of creatives, but that's the thing, like, this is how it's supposed to be, I guess. But another thing that I wanted you to, I don't know, maybe comment on or weigh in on, like, I mean, have you seen Turel's? Have you seen it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So, how that is not just a representation of literally what it is, like, there's more, there's so many ramifications and implications that piece has in this part of the world. And it's not just about even the plot or the characters, it's just what it says on a larger level. And I just
Yeah.
know what you think about that, or how it made you feel, that how is this piece, how what am I saying, how you thought this piece was speaking in a larger kind of context.
I've had I can't count the number of conversations I've had about this show at this point, because it's just like, and that's a good sign. Like, that's a good show. Is like when you can talk about it with everyone and just like never run out of things to talk about. Like, honestly, it's like, watching it, I had some issues with its story. I had some issues with like its pacing, but I was like, who cares? Like, I'm not gonna say any of that, because like, in terms of what it's done for representation and in terms of what it's done for um, the standard of what is considered good television, like, it's too important to like, nitpick. Like,
Definitely.
I don't want to like criticize it, because it's just like, it's it's unlike anything we've done before,
Yeah.
and it's just like, I've never been I've never like so this is the thing, like, when you grow up watching Western media, like, it's not that it's inherently better. It's not that they have better stories to tell, and it's not that they have better artistic voices. It's just that they've had more time to develop,
Yeah,
you
definitely.
know? And over time, it's just like, because they've advanced so much in their storytelling technique and in terms of what they represent and how they represent it, you become so accustomed to those tropes. Like, you become so there's no story beat that can surprise you after a certain point.
And I think
And
it has so much to do with language. Like,
yeah,
English is a hegemonic language, and we think
exactly. Yeah,
English, we dream in English, and it's
yeah,
like we're wired, it's a very
yeah,
subconscious kind of
yeah.
piece that's at play.
But what that does then is that it sort of dilutes your appreciation of local art, because a lot of local art is made by people who are only exposed to local art. And so it's sort of watching like an infant industry creating infant art, and it's like, so it's never going to resonate with you, it's never going to really connect with you. And that's why the few instances where like this industry makes something that genuinely resonates with me, it's just such a precious experience, because it's like, now it's sort of the best of both worlds, because it's entertaining, it's engaging, it's important, but it's also something I recognize,
Yeah.
and it's not even the weird uncanny valley representation that like Indian art is. It's really literally what I know and what I've known my entire life. Like, it's the people that I know, it's the language that I know, you know and it's just, that's the biggest contribution, I think. Like, and like, man, Asim Vasi is a genius. Like, I I remember like when I saw Cake for the first time, it was just like, it was such a like mind-blowing experience for me, because it was just, and I'd never like bothered to watch like a Pakistani film in cinemas. Like, I'll catch it afterwards, but like, I was really excited to see it, and I went and I saw it, and it was just like, it was the thing. It was like, first I felt like hopeful,
Mm.
for the state of the arts in Pakistan, because like, and I know that's very trite to say, but like, if somebody can make this, in my lifetime, then
There's
there's
hope.
a lot farther that we can go,
Yeah.
and then we can go, you know. And secondly, it just made me feel like, almost less alone.
Mm.
Like, it made me feel like, my sensibility in art is not just mine. There are other people who are making these things.
Listening and seeing, and
Yeah.
that rings so true, because even while I was watching Churels, there was something that just felt like it was mine, like this is,
Yeah.
there was no gap that way. And even though
Yeah.
I love Western cinema and I enjoy it and I feel connected to it, but that feeling that, oh my God, this is me, this is us, it makes you, when you
Yeah.
have that connection, that's when you realize that, oh my God, this is what I was missing, or this is what I wanted. And I think even like in Cake we saw that feeling
Yeah.
of connection, and there's just this cohesiveness that, regardless of whatever plot points are kind of contentious or confusing, that inner kind of essence, it is there. And I think that
Yeah.
it definitely does pave the way for more voices and things. But I feel like in Pakistan we do have a censorship problem. Like, it's definitely
Yeah.
a problem. And if this,
And I'm so glad that this show did not care about that at all. Like, I'm so glad.
it's also because it aired on Z5, which is not
Yeah.
ours. And I thought about it,
Yeah.
okay, like if this had to go up on YouTube, or if this had to go up on some local streaming service which doesn't exist, but if it had to go up like that, it probably would be cut up, or B, it probably would not go, up. I mean, for instance,
The whole season would be about 45 minutes long after they just like got everything out.
10 episodes, it would be like,
Yeah.
15 minutes short of a feature film. So
Yeah.
that's what happens. I mean, if you look at, for instance, Simon Kusut, he was trying to release in the Tamasha, which just,
Yeah.
it hasn't been released. And I was just thinking, if there was another platform that allowed the release, there's so much that people want to say here. They're just being unable to say it. So it kind of restored my faith in the fact that people are telling our stories with this kind of integrity and with honesty, but
Yeah.
we can't hear them for now, but they're there, so that's kind of
Yeah.
reassuring.
Yeah.
So last but not the least, I just want to ask you if you're willing to tell us, if you want to, give us a little bit of information about what we have in store with your next album, something to look forward to, or I don't know,
Yeah.
just a little something.
Um, well, so this one that I'm releasing right now, like I've put out 6 singles, I think, at this point. Yeah, 6 singles. And the 7th single is now the one that I the one that I did with Misha. And that's the one that we did the video for. So hopefully that one's gonna come out like mid-September-ish, and then after that, I released the album. um After the album, we're actually gonna put out like a remix album.
Oh,
So we're putting out an album of like, so I held sort of like a remix contest for my song with Shamoon,
oh,
which was like, yeah, and I just like, I uploaded the vocals and I just asked anybody who wanted to remix it to remix it.
were there
And
any?
I got some really cool submissions. I got like, 6 or 7 complete remixes, which were like really like well done and like just completely changed the whole vibe of the song. And so I'm really excited about those. So I'm gonna put those in, and then I'm gonna put in a remix of one of my songs on this album. It's called Clean, which I've already released. But I'm gonna do a remix of that song with someone. I'm not gonna reveal who.
Someone,
And then
someone.
someone. And then there's a remix of my song with Zoe, with again someone. Not gonna don't want to give too much away. Yeah. And there's a couple others that like are being done right now. So like it's going to be about, I think, 9 or 10 remixes, just like an album remixes. And the one after that actually is um it's like 8 tracks and it's done, because this one was like complete by like March, and since then I've just been working on like quarantine music. And so I now have an album of quarantine music, which like I'm seriously considering just like dropping with like no promotion, just the day after the current one drops. Like
Just drop it. I can't wait for quarantine music by you. Like, I want to know what you have to say and what you're doing. Like, I want to know. But I think you must release it soon. Like, we need to hear.
yeah, it's sort of the album that I was telling you about, like just the one where I'm forcing myself to be more honest. And it's like it's sort of a stylistic shift. Like it's very guitar heavy, and I don't really do guitar stuff honestly, but this is like it's a bit like leaning into like folk, and like leaning into like folk electronica, but you know, it also has sort of like a Phoebe Bridgers, Lord, bit of a Kanye vibe. Like it's dark and it's kind of moody and it's like kind of acoustic, and you know, it has an interesting vibe. And I just, yeah, I'm excited about it.
So when can we hope to hear that?
Well, I mean, if I'm smart, I'm gonna put it out a year from now and really like milk the current one for
Yeah,
its, you know, benefits before I start another one. But part of me just wants to drop it the day after. Like, why not release 2 albums over 2 days? Like,
that
why
one
not?
part of me is just like, please just release me. But yeah, that so many exciting things are already out and are coming up. And I'm just so glad that I got the chance to have this conversation with you. And this was lovely. And I hope that we can, in some capacity, work together someday and create
Yeah,
something that would be wonderful. And I'm so glad.
let's
Thank
write a screenplay.
Yeah, I would love to. Let's just do it. I mean, clearly you've been working on some things, and I was also like reading a few books on screenwriting and things so that I
Yeah,
can also write for the characters that I want to play, because I was like, this is just gonna help, because there's always such a dearth of writers, and
yeah,
screen.
yeah,
I was like, okay, let's fill the gap and let's
yeah.
try to work on that. So definitely we could do something like that for sure. And thank you so much. This was wonderful. And I wish you the best of luck for all of your endeavors. And I'm looking forward to hearing
Thank you.
all of that music. And yeah, thank you so much.